Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of the Articulate Fly, and we're back for the first East Tennessee Fishing Report of 2024 with Ellis Ward. Ellis, how you doing?
I am doing well, Marv. How are you?
As always, just trying to stay out of trouble. Was Santa Claus good to you this year?
Yeah, I was a good boy this last year, so I didn't get cold, which is always nice. My daughter actually asked me, not why do kids get cold, but what do you do? You know, what's the purpose? I was like, oh man, we'll talk about that next year.
The Industrial Revolution, all that kind of good stuff, right?
Yeah, I was like, look, you're a good kid. I'm a good kid. Well, we're going to gloss over that question for right now.
Yeah. And so I know your heart grew 3 sizes because over the Christmas holiday, you got a ton more rain in East Tennessee.
Yeah, better be careful making Grinch references. That'll also set me off. We got when there's a pretty cool on NOAA.org. There's an hourly forecast that gives you rain or sky cover, precipitation probability, humidity, temperature, wind chill, all that. And it can be good to, that's like one data source that you can use. For me, prepping, if the trip's going to happen one way or the other, or for people just to say, is this a good time to go fish? And they give these little bars when it says a high probability of rain, it'll highlight that. They do it between 4 and 6 hours. And when it's a 1/4 inch over that period of time, that's like a good amount of rain. And for a full day, it was, 1 1/4 for 2 or 3 of those 4 to 6 hour segments in a row. So I know that I've said this before. That amount of rain can cause problems, and we're up at the top of the Tennessee River system, and the dams do a good job of keeping everyone safe. It's been so dry since last fall that we need a couple more of those. Obviously not going to hope for anything that does others harm, but for just in isolation of our water tables and all the reservoirs, the freestone, just the general health of the wildlife around here, we need a few more of those. It was nice to finally get like a multi-day full drenching.
Yeah. And I would imagine, too, that you took advantage of the holiday season to spend a fair amount of time probably on your own chasing muskie, right?
Yeah. I think I got out there. I was out there on Christmas, and that was the day before it started coming down that day, and then it really opened the throttles up. And then, yeah, it took a break for a few days. Had a trout trip, last trout trip of the year, it was fun. Guy's first time actually contacted me through listening to this podcast. So shouts out to Ryan. And yeah, we saw the post spawn activity of the brown trout and got some risers. And I mean, it was a cold day, upper 30s, a little bit windy for 9 hours. So it fished hard. And I kind of spent the previous day or two taking care of the things that one needs to take care of when otherwise they're off chasing muskie and bouncing around the tail hours at basically 24 hours a day. So a couple good days of admin in there, good trip, and back at it day after tomorrow, and then trips sort of pick back up starting next week, mostly for muskie still.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, right? Because I would imagine that having the more sustained flows, right, from the high water, and also the fact that it's kind of been colder, I would imagine that patterning the muskie is probably getting a little bit easier than it was probably 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, so you get to benefit from your times on the low water. In that low water where the fish can be very finicky. Um, if you're out there enough and if you are fishing enough, it doesn't happen over one season. It certainly doesn't happen over one day. You can stumble into it over the course of a day or just a couple hours, but you can over the course of years, you can figure out where they're probably going to be, what they're probably going to be doing. Pick your weather days, your moon days, and really get those things dialed in. For my own fishing, I get to qualify follows and new zones as wins because if I catch them, it's like, all right, well, that's if I have a trip in 2 or 3 days, like, got to think twice about really wanting to feed too many fish on your own um, if you don't have other spots. So doing all that work in low water and getting the follows, and even on some trips, I have guys putting in so many more casts, so many more presentation than I can do on my own. And I actually get to explore and sort of bank that data from the guys who are paying me to guide them. And getting all of that and putting all of it together over years, you come up with, all right, I'm going to focus on these areas, and you start seeing more fish. They can be tough on that. It's the same as every other fish, low and clear. They can really need some convincing, and you just might not have too many shots at convincing them by the time they're under the boat and saying, see you later. So some of that staying when you know where they are, you have the confidence to say, no, I know I'm fishing over. You're not just saying it to make yourself feel sane. Oh, I can't imagine how many times we've presented to a muskie today and haven't been eaten. There's places where the fish are that when the water's off, the likelihood of them eating and eating pretty quickly, as opposed to following in the 8 6 times at the boat in clear water and not going. Um, the chance of that happening is of those full commitment eats is going to be a lot higher. So I certainly thankful for that. There's gives and takes there because, and this is more on the French broad, less on the clench. You're not able to see more than maybe a foot. Um, the French broad is just a little sandier, and you lose visibility quickly. And there's a lot of structure we're casting into, and so you get the feel of the river pretty quickly. But first couple hours can feel pretty snaggy, and you got to be pretty heads up and what you're doing with your fly and how you're working it. So as always, somewhat redundant speaking from me and walking back on my own words, but there are pros and cons to the high dirty.
Yeah, got it. And of course, heading into the to the full fledged jaws of winter is also tying season, and have a pretty good tying question for you from James Culp, and he apparently has been watching your tying videos on YouTube, and I guess in one of your previous ones you talked about the value of shorter wedges on drunken disorderly heads. And he was wondering if you could maybe talk about that a little bit more, about why it's valuable and maybe some tips for, how to time a little bit more effectively. And I guess he specifically wants to know about how to make a smooth transition between the bunny strip of the head and the deer hair.
Yeah. And I've noted this on all of my tying videos related to the drunk and to the swim bug. And I've talked about it a bunch. I learned this stuff from listening to Tommy And from tying, I really can't even guess how many awful flies. And then you start getting a little better, and then I still cut heads off. Sometimes the hair is just too buoyant, and yeah, maybe the head just ended up being too long. I'm switching from size 1 to size 1/0 or going down to the 2s for minis. And um, yeah, so it's a long way of saying whatever I'm talking about with this, it is worth finding a couple of the podcasts that Tommy has been on. If you just look up Tommy Lynn's Drunk and Disorderly podcast, you'll be able to find a few. And a lot of what he says, I suspect that it can be similar to how I speak. A lot of what he says, it's very clear. I fish with him. He almost speaks a different language. But when you understand what he's talking about, and he's talking about just your fingers as opposed to even wrist, as opposed to even forearm, just these little light tap, 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 and angles and all this stuff. He talks about tying a little bit too, and this is what the reason I bring it up is because I'm gonna quote him on one of the tying components of it. Definitely go try to find those things, and he wouldn't even take credit for me trying to extol his virtues when I was telling him thank you. He's like, oh, Larry Dower is the one to tie deer hair in with the intention of carving it for a specific purpose in the water. I was like, all right, you're just not going to, cool. But what he had said was, and he said it in two different ways, the width of the head is proportional to the length of the body. And I must have paused and re-listened to that one sentence when I first heard it, I don't know, 20 or 30 times. I was like, all right, so that's completely unhelpful. Well, after you tie a few, and even one, you tie a few more like that, you start to dial in what that width actually looks like with respect to what is going on with the rest of the fly. And you stay within those bounds and sort of figure it out from there. The other one he had said is that you start from the eye. So you take that razor blade up and you put it flat down against the eye. And you don't want the edge of that. It's not supposed to be a block. There is no edge. It's what the water is supposed to be cut. And he talks about chucking and jiving and tight cuts and all these different phrasing. It's that front edge is cutting down into the water, and it is not like a crankbait or a jerk. Now it's a little more like a jerk bait. It's not like a crankbait such that you hit it, and because the rest of the body is buoyant and because the lip's doing this, there's a bunch of other mechanics involved there. It starts to wobble in a certain way. It's cutting down because of the way the fly wants to travel in the path of least resistance. When you give it a little tap, and then when you give it another tap after it's started to float up a little bit, and Tommy talks about float recovery, you give it another tap, and because of how it's oriented and the shape of your head, which is narrow at the front, wider as it goes in the back, it wants to, the path of least resistance is to go down and back the other way. And so in order to, I would say, maximize that what I just described is the dog walk. It cuts one way, it starts to float up, you hit it again right when it's done going the other way and starting to float, tap it again, and it goes down and over to the other side. That right there is one left to right. And when you're out fishing these things, and it took me so long to get there, you're watching it go left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. You can control that dog walk really, really well. And in order to, one way to maximize that, I think, is to just view the edge, the front edge of that fly as the driver of that entire motion. And so you worry less about that flow recovery and getting this big head. Tommy's quote was, once you have that edge, it matters very little what is behind that edge. And so if you just think about the mechanics of what's happening in the water, you can give that line a tap. It's not being told to go down and to the left because of what is behind the front edge of the deer hair. There's a lot of helpful stuff that can be encouraged as that happens, but when you start going longer heads during that kill, so as it's supposed to be floating up and you're about to hit it again to go back down to the right, if you have a longer head, there's more surface area and it can actually get pushed down. So instead of floating back up, it sort of folds over onto itself. And for those folks listening that this makes absolutely no sense to, I completely understand that. I'm sure it makes sense to James. I'm sure it makes sense to however many people are listening that have tied a drunken disorderly and said, why is this thing folding up on itself as I'm stripping it? Shorter and faster strips. And then, go with a shorter, wider head. It tends to not be that long head that is driving the dog walk. It's those short, compressed heads that really focus on that tight cut at the front, starting at the eye without any width to it. And then a nice beefy collar. You can cut that thing down if it's adding too much buoyancy, but that collar adds a lot of stability and actually stops it from folding onto itself, along with some other things. So, I'll start getting into flash selection and getting the right mallard guy if I don't stop myself now. I do think that will be helpful for James, though.
Yeah, and James, hit us back if you want us to dig into this a little bit more. And I just called off the SWAT team, so you're lucky.
Woo. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. It's like, still in the holiday spirit. And, folks, we love questions. The Articulate Fly. You can email them to us. You can DM me on social media, whatever's easiest for you. And, Ellis and I will put our heads together and come up with what we're going to do for our drawing promotion for 2024. But I know from talking to you before we started recording that you may not be up to your elbows in borax, but you have plenty of bucktail still.
Yeah, I did a little bit of a push there, and all the grade 1s and 2s, so the super long and also super expensive tails had sold. And most folks got a number of tails, so not just the grade 1 and 2s, but I have a lot of the grade 3 and 4s, which next to the 5.5 inch. I mean, for anyone who ties with bucktail, if you go to whatever your largest tail is and look how many 5.5 inch fibers there are, when you're getting a tail that is mostly 5-inch fibers, it looks insane. And the ones that are mostly 5s with a lot of 6s in there, it doesn't look like it's a genetic anomaly. So I have a lot of we'll say 4.5, which they're really, really nice tails. And those are the grade 3s, and then a lot in the grade 4s. Those are the $15 and $20 tails. And basically just want to say that those are there and available, and let me know if you have questions or want to see pictures on some of them. I'll keep them for quite some time, and I'll keep a bunch for myself, but at some point I'll probably end up dyeing a good number of those, and naturals tend to be hard to come by. So Yeah, for those interested in getting some good natural in the 4.5 inch and up to the 5. I will have plenty of those for a little bit and a bunch still in the freezer. So bucktail season is not over by any means.
There you go. And, folks, we're in the process at the Articulate Fly building out a Patreon community. And one of the benefits we have two different tiers. And at one of the tiers, you get 10% off of Ellis's bucktails. And there's another tier where once a year you get $100 guide credit with Ellis. So great way for you to support Ellis. It's a great way for you to support the show. And you can find the link to that in the show notes. And Ellis, before I let you go, I know you're getting ready to kind of get back in the water, kind of full bore here. But you want to let folks know how they can reach out to you so they can get on your guide calendar?
Yes. Website is elliswardflies.com. You can send an inquiry, email me through that. Texting me is always, texting, calling is always, I would say, a better option at 513-543-0019. And mostly for entertainment, you can follow on YouTube at Ellis Ward Fishing. Instagram is at Ellis Ward Guides. And I tend to not put up, I'd say 90% of what goes on in my life. They're good indicators of what's happening. But if you are interested in specifically now for the next month or two, post spawn browns, fishing streamers, still have a lot of great dry fly activity, and fishing for muskie until the spawn in late April, give me a shout.
Yeah. Or if you just need a suggestion on your next vape pack, that works too, right?
Oh yeah, I've been dude. I'm the one on the ground doing the legwork, and I don't know what else you need from a guide.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, listen, folks, just want to wish everybody a happy new year. Happy New Year, Ellis.
Happy New Year, Marv.
Tight lines, everybody.